Well, good afternoon. I'm Lee Hamilton, president of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to the forum with the Indian Foreign Secretary Nirupama Rao. I want to take the opportunity to recognize India's Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy in Washington. Ambassador Arun K. Singh is with us. And we are pleased to partner with the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. They have helped make this event possible. I understand most of you who know these things better than I do, they're called FICCI, but I didn't think it's appropriate for me to use it that way, so I used the full name. The transformation of U.S.-Indian relations in recent decades is one of the most positive developments in international affairs. In addition to shared democratic values, the United States has become the world's largest investor in India. American universities educate more Indian students than those from any other foreign country. There are 2.2 million Americans of Indian origin who are a natural bridge between the two countries, and India has a growing presence in American culture, literature, film, and music. Both countries face challenges, but also many opportunities are in a position to seize them jointly. During this crucial period in its history, India is fortunate to have a foreign secretary as talented and experienced as Nirupama Rao. She was appointed foreign secretary in July 2009, the second woman in India's history to head the foreign service. She represented India in the historic talks with Pakistan last month in New Delhi in an effort to advance peace talks between the two countries. She has also been an active supporter of reconstruction efforts in Sri Lanka in the aftermath of decades of conflict in that country. She joined India's Foreign Service in 1973 and has served with distinction in Moscow and Washington. She was India's ambassador to Peru as well as High Commission for India and Sri Lanka from 2004 to 2006. She was India's first woman spokesman of the Ministry of External Affairs. And prior to her appointment as Foreign Secretary, she served as India ambassador to China. She was a fellow at Harvard's Weatherhead Center, served as Distinguished International Executive in Residence at the University of Maryland from 1999 to the year 2000. In addition to her impressive diplomatic career, she has published a book of poetry in 2004 titled Rain Rising. Before I have her come to the podium, I want to recognize Secretary Bill Coleman is with us, former Transportation Secretary. We're delighted to have him. And the ambassador from Afghanistan, Jawad, is here. We're delighted to have the ambassador here with us as well.
And also in business, the CEO of PepsiCo reporting.
She was?
The CEO of PepsiCo.
CEO?
Indra Nui.
My goodness. How did I possibly miss that? I don't know. Thank you, Bill. It is my very great pleasure to introduce you to the Foreign Secretary. She will take questions after her presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton, for your words of welcome and your very meaningful words about the U.S.-India relationship, and particularly the role of the Indian community, the Indian American community here, which we all celebrate, applaud, and recognize in terms of their contribution to the friendship and partnership between our two countries. It is a particular privilege to be here at the Woodrow Wilson Center here this afternoon, amidst the distinguished men and women who are here in this audience, many of whom have put in dedicated work and study in subjects that are of immense relevance to the India-U.S. discourse. I am grateful for your interest and will, I am sure, be enriched by your thoughts and views in the course of this afternoon's meeting. I would also like to recognize the role of the U.S.-India Business Council and the Indian Federation and Associations of Business and Industry that have reached out and worked successfully. Ranjana Khanna is here with us today, with partners across the United States to build the economic linkages and the people-to-people bonds that are the bedrock of the India-U.S. relationship. At the outset, let me speak of the strong fundamentals that unite our two democracies. It was President Woodrow Wilson who said, and I quote, "I believe in democracy because it releases the energies of every human being." This is what democracies seek to do. In essence, to harness the energies and enable the empowerment of all their citizens, regardless of color or creed, ethnicity or economic status. Our two robust and vibrant democracies believe and act on the basis of such ideals. I am therefore particularly enthused by the choice of theme for my address this afternoon, particularly as we commence the second decade of this century. It is appropriate that we reflect on the essence and the potential of the unique partnership between two of the world's greatest democracies, the oldest and the largest. Geographically, India and America are separated by almost 10,000 miles. Yet we are nevertheless connected in a very direct and obvious way by the kind of similarities we share: our respect for fundamental democratic freedoms, our strong and enduring democratic institutions, the rule of law, our culture of debate and discussion, the stress on accountability and transparency in governance, our autonomous institutions that are constitutionally empowered to safeguard fundamental rights, and our shared commitment to preserve the pluralistic and secular nature of our diverse and open societies. It was therefore no accident that the constitution that India adopted in 1950 was also inspired in great measure by the ideals of freedom, of equality, and of justice that formed the bedrock of the United States Constitution. Yet, for several decades after our independence, relations between our two democracies failed to realize their potential because of the estrangements, I use the term derived from Mr. Dennis Cooks's book, derived from the atmosphere of the Cold War and its manifestations in our region. We have come a long way, however, in the last decade and a half. Today, as India has grown to be one of the leading economies of the world and a responsible nuclear power, we are cooperating at the global level on a range of issues. Bilaterally, our ties have become truly broad-based. The conclusion of the India-U.S. Civil Nuclear Agreement in 2008 marked a major, definitive milestone in our relationship. That our ties are marked by both popular and political support was underlined in 2009 by the reaffirmation by our newly elected governments that they would encourage the further positive transformation of our strategic partnership for mutual benefit. In July 2009, we launched a strategic dialogue process that covers a number of areas of convergence under the 5 pillars of strategic cooperation, energy and climate change, education and development, economics, trade and agriculture, and science, technology, health and innovation. This is the sentiment that was expressed by President Obama when he told Prime Minister Manmohan Singh last year that, I quote, "Obstacles once thought insurmountable are now wellsprings of new cooperation," unquote, and that ours is, and I quote again, "one of the defining partnerships of the 21st century," unquote. The strong support in both countries for a robust bilateral relationship is, in our Prime Minister's words, based on both principle and pragmatism. Not only are we natural partners in addressing strategic issues of regional or global concern, but there are very direct linkages on a day-to-day basis. The US is our largest trading partner, if we count goods and services, with a total bilateral trade of $65.9 billion last year. The United States is one of the leading sources of foreign direct investment into India, and recently, many Indian companies have announced major expansion plans in India. US businesses have increased their competitive advantages and innovation drive through their operations in India. Indian investment flows into the US were estimated at $13 billion in 2007 and continue to steadily increase. Statistics show that 70% of urban Indians believe relations between India and the United States have improved in recent years, and of them, 91% consider this to be a good thing. Ladies and gentlemen, it is these fundamentals that are the essence of the partnership between our two democracies. Let me turn to priorities and convergences. There is another key contributing factor here today. The foreign policy priorities of the United States and India seem to converge now as never before, and both governments recognize the validity of their cooperation in helping to craft solutions to the foremost challenges of our times: the threat of terrorism as it affects both our nations, the dangers of religious extremism, promoting development in Afghanistan, the global financial and economic crisis that has given new content and meaning to the work of forums like the G20, the common challenges of addressing the impact of global climate change or disaster relief, pandemics or piracy at sea. Our partnership has increasing relevance and meaning. What are the challenges and opportunities? The convergences I spoke of create the global strategic partnership in which India and the United States of America have launched a new phase of cooperation across a broad spectrum of human endeavor, based on our common ideals and complementary strengths to address the global challenges of the 21st century. And in India, the United States must see, I believe, an anchor for stability in our region, a nation that is wedded to the principles of responsible behavior and mature restraint, a powerful and rapidly growing economy, which can, as one analyst noted recently, be, quote, I quote, potentially America's most important partner in Asia, unquote. Our Prime Minister sees the India-U.S. relationship as an essay in mutual comprehension. Today, the challenge is how we take our economic and political partnerships to a higher level of achievement and provide, as it has been said, more passion to energize our relationship further. What are the constraints of our relationship? Often, the question influential opinion makers in India ask is, has the United States sufficiently visualized the importance of its relationship with India? And has it been able to free this relationship of the hyphenations that have somehow tied it down and stunted its normal growth? Why India? What is the importance of India today? Today, when the world and the United States look at our region, they are witness to the rise of an India, a democratic nation with proven abilities to manage diverse developmental challenges within its territorial borders, that has increasing ability to promote economic development beyond its borders in our neighboring countries and farther afield in Africa, for instance, whose skills in the knowledge economy place it in the front ranks of global excellence, a country which is an acknowledged nuclear power with a record of responsible behavior and adherence to MTCR and NSG guidelines, and whose rapid economic growth place it in the trajectory of becoming the third largest economy in the world. Our economic performance against the backdrop of the international economic and financial crisis serves as a useful illustration of the discipline and the prudence with which India has managed its financial and economic policies. India's growth in the 4 years preceding the onset of the global financial crisis was around 9%. In late 2008, India's growth slowed down to 6.7%, but recovered to a level of 7.2% in the last financial year. Projections indicate 8.2% in the next financial year, and in the next 4 to 5 years, we anticipate a return to 9% based on a revival in exports, manufacturing, infrastructure investment, and private consumption demand, along with a favorable capital market. India, in a knowledge and technology-driven world, has demonstrated certain unique strengths. Our IT exports for the current year are poised to touch the $50 billion figure. India currently exports generic medicines worth $11 billion. Our leading steel companies have posted double-digit growth in sales volumes. The December 2009 index of industrial production surged month on month by a record 16.8%. Cumulative industrial growth is pegged at around 9%. The most noticeable feature of India's economic growth is that it is driven primarily by domestic demand. In the recent budget, 46% of the total plan allocation was earmarked for infrastructure development, which implies significant business and investment opportunities. Our youthful demography, with a projected average age of 29 years in 2020, will drive economic expansion in our country, particularly the expansion of our urban sector, well into the second half of this century. To achieve an external environment that promotes the fulfillment of our economic growth, our targets and ambitions, we have identified 3 key prerequisites: capital inflows, access to technology and innovation, as well as the promotion of a free, fair, and open world trading system. Central to these tasks is a world order that helps the promotion of our development interests. And here again, the partnership between India and the United States can provide a creative impulse and momentum that builds a global environment that is conducive to the realization of these goals. Turning to India's immediate neighborhood, I believe that there should be deeper awareness and understanding of India's objective to work for stability and peace in its neighborhood. Just as the tackling of terrorism is a policy priority of the U.S. administration, India too is concerned at the terror infrastructure that has been allowed to be established, take root, and be used as an instrument of policy in our immediate neighborhood. Our heartland, our cities, and our people are exposed to the threat of terrorism in a constant and almost unremitting way, in a manner that the United States well understands, given the similar threats that are directed against the American people. Let me define restraint, because restraint is a word that crops up in terms of India's response to the threats it faces. India's approach has been to deal with the challenges we face, yes, with restraint. Despite the brazen and malignant nature of the threats we face, India has made several genuine efforts to restore trust and confidence in our region. Aggressive pronouncements by persons identified by the world as terrorists continue to be made openly against India. Distinctions made between various terrorist outfits are now meaningless, since they are now in effect fused both operationally and ideologically. We have consistently emphasized the need for governments concerned to act decisively to dismantle the infrastructure of terrorism and to effectively deal with groups that perpetrate it. However, our restraint should not be confused with weakness or unwillingness to act against those that seek to harm our people, create insecurity, and hamper our development goals. We are a strong country, and we possess the capacity to deal effectively with those that pursue destructive agendas against India and its people. We have time and time again made genuine attempts to address outstanding issues, most importantly, the issue of terrorism, through dialogue with Pakistan. My meeting with my Pakistan counterpart a few days ago represented the latest such move. Despite the provocations we have faced constantly from terrorists whose linkages have unfortunately been traced back to Pakistani soil, we have not abandoned the path of dialogue. And in our recent meeting, India's approach was to focus on our concerns regarding terrorism, pending humanitarian issues, and some bilateral visits that have been planned or spoken of but have not taken place. But it continues to be our conviction that for this dialogue to really make progress, Pakistan should take meaningful steps to address our concerns on terrorism and cease the encouragement of terrorism targeted against India. In January 2004, the then Pakistani leadership had made such an assurance, on the basis of which we resumed our composite dialogue to discuss various outstanding issues in our relationship. Today, unfortunately, Pakistan claims that it is in no position to give us such a guarantee that terrorism can be controlled by its authorities. In such a situation, the people of India, who are already bitterly affected by the series of terrorist attacks directed against them, can hardly be expected to support the resumption of a full-blown composite dialogue with Pakistan. It is also important that there are strict accountability criteria that apply to defense assistance rendered to Pakistan for operations against terrorists and insurgents on its border with Afghanistan. Our past experience, unfortunately, regarding such assistance has taught us to be vigilant to the possibility of it being used for purposes that generate tension and hostile actions against India. We do not have aggressive designs against Pakistan, and we want it to be a stable and prosperous country. But we will be vigilant about our security. That is our sovereign right. The deteriorating situation in Afghanistan is one of the foremost security-related challenges faced in our region. We feel that it is vital for the international community to stay the course in Afghanistan. India has, at the request of Afghanistan, worked on infrastructure creation and capacity building in key development sectors with a total investment of $1.3 billion across several provinces and in very difficult terrain. Our assistance is provided in a transparent and fully accountable manner and has underscored our commitment to Afghan democracy and inclusive development. At the recent London conference, we have announced new initiatives in the agriculture sector and in institutional capacity building. In all these areas, we have responded to the felt needs of the Afghan people. We believe it is imperative for the international community in its new initiatives on security, reintegration, and reconciliation in Afghanistan to approach these issues carefully, with caution. We believe that any reintegration process should include only those who abjure violence, give up armed struggle and terrorism, and are willing to abide by the values of democracy, pluralism, and human rights. There is every risk otherwise that the Taliban would resurrect themselves as they have in the past, even when we think that they have been defeated or we are rid of their hardcore elements. The barbaric attack against Indians engaged in humanitarian and development work in Afghanistan on 26th February was an attack by those who do not wish any other future for that country except one that suits their sinister ambitions. The international community should understand that such attempts, if unchecked, will only embolden the same forces that held sway in Afghanistan in the 1990s and caused the tragedy of 9/11. One cannot stress enough the need to avoid compromises or differentiation between the so-called shades and hues of the Taliban. That would be disastrous for Afghanistan and for the world. In short, there is no quick solution to the AfPak situation. It is important for the international community in its own interest to stay the present course for as long as it is necessary. Let me speak briefly on new areas of partnership between India and the United States. Speaking in Washington last November, Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh said, and I quote, "Our relationship will see a new emphasis on 5 E's: economy, energy, environment, education, and empowerment, even as we further strengthen our ties in defense, security, and counterterrorism. We will also harness our natural synergies in science and technology, education and research to advance food security, improve healthcare, develop green technologies, and create the human resources for the future," unquote. Both our governments are agreed that the India-U.S. partnership is important to address the challenges of an increasingly interdependent world. Our cooperation could cover different fields, for example, the critical area of agriculture and food security, especially with regard to Africa. This Indo-U.S. cooperation is envisaged by us as a net additionality over and above what India is doing bilaterally with Africa. One possibility is the mechanism of triangular cooperation, where India's experience and expertise as an emerging market economy could be relevant to Africa, and where we could partner with U.S. businesses and other parties. In the joint statement issued on the occasion of our Prime Minister's visit to Washington, Dr. Manmohan Singh and President Obama announced their intention to develop a framework for cooperation on trade and investment to foster an environment conducive to technological innovation and collaboration, promote inclusive growth and job creation, and support opportunities for increased trade and investment, including for small and medium-sized enterprises. They also agreed to launch the U.S.-India Financial and Economic Partnership to strengthen engagement on economic, financial, and investment-related issues. An important facet of our relations is our growing interaction in the defense sector. We hold a regular dialogue on defense issues and also joint exercises. Our defense trade is growing. There is potential for it to grow further as we look at diversified sources for our defense systems, as also to allow private sector participation in our defense production. It is our hope that the U.S. government will adjust its export control regulations to facilitate more efficient defense trade. This would be in line with growing mutual confidence and the long-term strategic partnership that we seek to build. The visit of Defense Secretary Robert Gates to India in January this year enabled a sharing of perspectives on this crucial sector of our cooperation. Both our democracies are committed to the protection of the global commons, maritime, space, or the cyber highways. The Indian Navy plays a major role in facilitating maritime security across vital sea lanes of the Indian Ocean. Our Navy has been deployed in anti-piracy escort operations in the Gulf of Aden, cooperation between India and the United States for the security of sea lanes is now all the more relevant. Similarly, India has provided more than 100,000 troops, observers, and police officers to 43 UN peacekeeping missions over the last 60 years. On countering terrorism, we have bilaterally reaffirmed our shared determination to cooperate in unprecedented ways, from sharing intelligence and best practices to training and increased exchanges between our security agencies. This has been effectively demonstrated in the wake of the Mumbai terror attack. Briefly going back to the subject I raised in the preceding paragraph about the need to remove export controls, the ongoing meeting of the High Technology Cooperation Group here in Washington, D.C., is demonstrative of our efforts to gradually reduce and eliminate the controls on export of high technology from the U.S. to India, and to liberalize export licensing requirements and whittle down entity lists that seem anachronistic in the vastly changed environment of India-U.S. relations today. Our strategic dialogue today has an important development focus covering areas such as agriculture, health, education, energy, and women's empowerment. In health, our cooperation, especially in promoting R&D to combat diseases like drug-resistant tuberculosis that continues to affect the poorer sections of our population in India and other developing countries, is particularly important. Agriculture also remains an important sector of the Indian economy, accounting for almost 18% of our GDP and supporting around 60% of our workforce. In recent years, this sector has recorded an average growth of 2.5% annually compared to 8% in other sectors. Achieving rapid growth in agricultural productivity is therefore a national priority. The government has allocated substantial funds for improving infrastructure in the agrarian sector and expanding irrigation. It is in this context that our ongoing cooperation in this sector is so vital. Through our partnership in this sector, we hope to strengthen our food processing capacities, improve farm-to-market linkages, provide better agricultural extension services, and weather forecasting with an emphasis on monsoon modeling. Our cooperation is also focusing on research and capacity building to increase food productivity and to enhance food security. Education is a key to empowering and transforming the lives of our people. Our government is working on expanding and restructuring various educational sectors, including higher education, vocational education, and skills development infrastructure. We are also in the process of setting up several new world-class universities, including setting up of the legal framework to allow us to tap the best talent in the world to participate in the academic activity of these new centers of excellence. President Obama and Prime Minister Singh launched the Obama-Singh 21st Century Knowledge Initiative in November last year. The Fulbright Nehru Scholarship Program launched last year has also been augmented by additional contributions by both our governments. Similarly, through the Women's Empowerment Forum, where we will share ideas and best practices in promoting women's participation and equality in society, and the CEO's Forum, which will inform the India-U.S. economic dialogue, we intend to build greater synergies and productive bilateral collaborations. I referred to the framework for cooperation on trade and investment, and that, together with the negotiations for the bilateral investment treaty, would contribute significantly to this process. Therefore, this is a relationship with boundless possibilities for mutual benefit. Through the surge in trade, services, and investment that we have witnessed in both directions, our entrepreneurs and corporates have already demonstrated that India-U.S. ties are creating jobs and benefits in both countries. I now turn to the issue of climate change, where the steps that we take will need to be intrinsically linked with the growth prospects and developmental aspirations of our people. India, along with the United States, actively participated in the negotiation of the Copenhagen Accord. India has agreed to being listed in the chapeau of the Accord on certain conditions, including that the Accord be seen as a political document and not a legally binding document. It is not a template for outcomes. Further, it is not a separate third track of negotiations outside the UNFCCC. The significant points of convergence in the Accord should help all parties to reach agreed outcomes under the multilateral UN negotiations. We need in India to sustain an economic growth of at least 9% if we have to eradicate poverty and meet our larger human development goals. This will require in the short to medium term a quadrupling of our power generation capacity. We are seeking to expand our nuclear energy generation from 4,000 megawatt to 20,000 megawatt by 2020 and to add nearly 20,000 megawatt of solar energy also by 2020 to substantially expand the base of wind and biomass energy and also increase energy efficiency together with expansion of our forest cover from 22% to 33% of our land mass. At the same time, coal would remain a key component of our energy mix. India is therefore seeking to access clean coal combustion technologies and new coal extraction technologies. India and the United States are working together in this important area. Our companies and scientists are working on specific projects in the sector of second and third generation biofuels, wind and solar energy. Our joint endeavor should be to create adaptable and affordable technology, as also to institute better practices that could then be replicated in other countries in Asia and Africa with similar climatic or development conditions. An important dimension of the landmark agreement on civil nuclear cooperation between our two countries is the substantive role that the United States nuclear power companies can play in the addition of more nuclear energy to India's energy mix. We are in the process of operationalizing the agreement through close coordination between our two governments. We've made very satisfactory progress in this regard. When it comes to dealing with new challenges, both our governments are agreed that the new global realities require that we revisit and reorganize existing governance models internationally that were put in place over 6 decades ago. We see our case for permanent membership of the UN Security Council as valid and legitimate in this context, and we seek the support of the United States in this endeavor. In another context, we see the G20 process as a useful representative mechanism to manage global economic and financial issues. The group has conceptualized and defined many constructive measures to deal with the financial crisis, its causes, and steps to mitigate the effects of the crisis through better regulation, supervision, and international financial governance. President Obama outlined his vision of a nuclear weapon-free world last April. This has also been consistently espoused by the Indian leadership for about 6 decades. In 2006, India presented specific proposals in the UNGA as possible building blocks of a new global, verifiable nuclear disarmament framework. These include a global agreement on no first use of nuclear weapons and non-use against non-nuclear weapon states, measures to reduce nuclear danger through de-alerting, reducing the salience of nuclear weapons in security doctrines, and preventing unintentional or accidental use of these weapons, a nuclear weapons convention prohibiting development, production, stockpiling, and use of nuclear weapons and on their destruction. Presently, we wish to see the emergence of a consensus in the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva on issues that the international community considers essential, including negotiations for a fissile material cut-off treaty. We are committed to global efforts to prevent the proliferation of all weapons of mass destruction. We have a law-based system of export controls that has stood the test of time. we have updated it in accordance with international best practices. Our lists and guidelines are harmonized with the Nuclear Supplies Group and the Missile Technology Control Regime, even though we are not as yet members of these regimes. Driven by common concerns about the security of nuclear assets, particularly in the backdrop of the increasing threat of terrorist access to them, India and the United States are partners in the global initiative to combat nuclear terrorism. Next month, Prime Minister Singh will participate in the Nuclear Security Summit hosted by President Obama in this city. We believe that the summit can be a milestone in addressing the threat of nuclear terrorism. We also hope that India and the United States can find other opportunities to work together for the safe, secure, and proliferation-resistant expansion of nuclear energy around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, having traversed the broad canvas of the partnership envisaged and endorsed by our democratic processes, I would hasten to recognize that in an increasingly complex world, while neither India nor the United States can achieve their goals on their own, and nor will our partnership exclusively suffice to address our problems, our respective peoples have strong reason to believe that our collaboration and our cooperation will certainly be crucial for shaping the character of the 21st century. As two proud and independent democracies, we may not always fully agree on everything. The future of our relationship will depend not only on the momentum that our strategic dialogue will attain and sustain and its outcome, but eventually on how our two peoples perceive our cooperation as safeguarding their aspirations and their sensitivities. But we have the maturity and the confidence in our relationship to make sure that we can expand and deepen areas of convergence, and that we have the capacity in a clear-eyed way to turn our varying perspectives into a search for more creative solutions to global challenges. That must be our mission. If we simply choose to employ our complementary strengths, protect and promote our synergies, and pursue initiatives that respond to the legitimate aspirations of our peoples, we can be confident that our partnership will acquire further substance and relevance. As Mahatma Gandhi said, you must be the change you want to see in the world. Once again, I thank you all.
Would you prefer to sit down? Okay. The Foreign Secretary will take a few questions now. I think we have microphones on each side. Please put your hand up and identify yourself. Start with Bob Hathaway here. Bob, right in the first row, right here.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. My question is on Iran, where I think it's clearly the case that both India and the United States share a common objective in that we don't want to see a nuclear-armed Iran. President Obama has tried negotiations. They don't seem to have gotten us very far. Meanwhile, Iran continues to move forward on its nuclear weapons program. Are you still confident that negotiations can walk Iran back? And if so, what's the basis for your optimism? Do we ever get to a point where we have to say negotiations aren't going to work? Or do we just continue to talk forever? Meanwhile, Iran continues to move ever closer to a weapons program or to a weapon.
Well, I realize that this is a situation that concerns all of us, and Iran is in our region, and Iran is a country with which we share a very long-standing and what we usually call a civilizational relationship. So we are very aware, and we closely monitor what happens in Iran. I was myself there last month, and I had the opportunity to talk with my counterpart, the Deputy Foreign Minister in the Iranian Foreign Ministry, and also to meet with the Iranian Foreign Minister and the National Security Advisor. And what we have of course, emphasize not only to our friends and partners who are concerned with the situation in Iran, but also to Iran itself, that they need to sort this matter out with transparency and through meaningful dialogue with the international interlocutors concerned, in this case the 6 countries, the P5+1 countries that are focused on this issue. We believe Iran has both rights and responsibilities stemming from its membership of the NPT, and also rights to develop its nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. But obviously this process has encountered difficulties and controversies, and there are certain actions that the international community has focused on, which it attributes to Iran having taken steps that, in the view of the IAEA, for instance, that beg certain questions which need to be answered. So we, in fact, voted with the resolution in the Board of Governors of the IAEA last November because of those questions that were raised, and we feel that we need satisfactory answers to those questions. Having said that, of course, I would continue to stress there is need for dialogue to sort this issue out. That sanctions, I know that the Security Council, the P5, are now contemplating sanctions against Iran. And we don't know what form those sanctions will take as yet. I believe this is a work in progress. But it continues to be our view that sanctions that target the Iranian people and would cause difficulties to them, to the ordinary man, woman, and child on the streets in Iran, would not be conducive to a resolution of this question. We don't want more instability in that region. Iran is very much a part of our region. Iran has a very important role, for instance, to play in the developing situation in Afghanistan. And we, of course, have strong bilateral ties with Iran. Lots of, I don't just refer to religious or cultural ties. We have a large population, as you know, of Shia Muslims in India. But, in ties in education, for instance, the largest number of foreign students in India today, self-financed students, come from Iran. They're all over the country studying in universities. I'm not saying religious institutions, but in our, universities. So we watch the situation carefully. We really hope that it doesn't get complicated further, let's put it that way, and that we try and resolve this issue through further dialogue.
All right, we'll go clear to the back, all the way back.
Good afternoon, Secretary Rao. Natasha Trani, New York Times Now. I just wanted to take your opinion on any perceived delays in the introduction of the nuclear damages bill in the Indian Parliament. Do you see that as something of concern in the implementation of the Indo-U.S. civilian nuclear deal? And are you also concerned in any way by the opposition that this bill is facing in India even before the introduction? Thank you.
Natasha, the implementation of the civil nuclear deal is proceeding smoothly and satisfactorily. That's the first point I'd like to make. And as far as the introduction of the civil nuclear liability bill in Parliament is concerned, it is ready for introduction, and in all likelihood it will be introduced after the recess.
Question here.
Raghuveer Goyal, India Global Nation Today. Madam Secretary, whatever you said about India-Pakistan relations and Pakistan's response that Pakistan cannot guarantee to tackle terrorism, but Pakistan is saying to the U.S. that they are combating terrorism, and now U.S. is giving away billions of dollars to Pakistan, including weapons, and many believe that most of the weapons were used against India. So what are you now telling to the U.S. and to the Pakistanis? And what is the future of what next steps India is going to take?
Raghuveer, my speech, I think, has been fairly clear on that issue. I need not elaborate on that further. I think you should read my speech.
Dennis Cooks at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Thank you very, very much for your excellent remarks. There was one subject, however, that didn't come up in the talk, and I wonder if we could have your views on that, and that is India's relations with its northern neighbor, with China. That would be of great interest, I believe.
Well, China is our largest neighbor. As you know, we share the longest border with China also, and it's an unresolved border. There is a boundary question between India and China that we are both countries focusing on and negotiating a settlement for this outstanding issue. The relations between our two countries, India and China, have improved significantly in the last 2 decades particularly. And we have a broad spectrum, multidimensional relationship between India and China that covers many areas. So it's just not focused on the boundary question alone, although that, in a sense, requires resolution to achieve a full-blown, well-functioning relationship between the two countries. There's no doubt about that. But that hasn't hindered the advancement of dialogue at the political level. That hasn't hindered the advancement of trade and business relations, of better connectivity between the two countries, and the traffic of ideas and of people between India and China has really increased, and so the awareness levels of what each country is doing today is much greater. And of course, the rise of China and of course the rise of India, I think, has become an object of world attention. And many, I know, in the West, and also I see many media commentaries about the so-called competition between India and China, a sort of a race between India and China. And I think in both our countries we see, of course, there is a competitive edge to the relationship, but there is also a great degree of collaboration and cooperation between the two countries. When it comes to India, how do we view China? I think, as I said recently in remarks I made in London at the International Institute of Strategic Studies, that we need to look at China with the widest possible field of vision. Not just on, of course, China's economic development, China's rise, China's growing military strength, China's relations with our neighbors. All these, I think, populate our vision when it comes to seeing how our relationship with China should be structured. But let me say, there is peace on our borders with China. There is tranquility. We speak of confidence-building measures being augmented. There is a defense-level dialogue. Our defense establishment and the People's Liberation Army, Air Force and Navy are in touch with each other. So in many ways, I think we have covered a lot of ground in a positive sense as far as our relationship is concerned.
We have a good many hands up. I'm not sure how much more time. We can probably only go a few more minutes. We'll go back here. No, all the way back, yeah.
This is Lalit Jha from Press Trust of India. In view of the recent series of attacks against Indians in Afghanistan, does India has any plan to scale down its operations in Afghanistan? And what are your plans for the security of the Indian personnel in Afghanistan?
The simple answer to your question, no. We are not scaling down our presence in Afghanistan. As far as your question about what security measures we are taking, obviously I cannot discuss that in a public forum. Suffice it to say that we are taking all necessary security measures to safeguard Indian lives in Afghanistan.
Madam Foreign Secretary Aziz Hanifa with India Abroad, it's good to see you again in town.
It's good to see you, Aziz.
Yeah, you were recently in Sri Lanka and you met with Sri Lankan President Mahinda Rajapaksa and other senior Sri Lankan officials. What has been India's position in terms of the IDPs? Is India satisfied with the way the IDPs are being repatriated? And also the whole Mahinda Rajapaksa phenomenon itself in terms of the election. The U.S. was quite lukewarm in terms of congratulating the president, but India sort of congratulated him with a lot of gusto. But in terms of the whole relationship, in terms of the fact that he's sort of pulling back in terms of the whole devolution package, etc., what were the discussions and did you get any assurances in this regard?
I was in Sri Lanka last week, exactly a week ago, in fact, and I met with my counterpart, the Sri Lankan Foreign Secretary and the Sri Lankan Foreign Minister, and I was privileged to have a meeting with the President of Sri Lanka, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa, also. Now, Sri Lanka is in the midst of campaign for its parliamentary elections, so I think the focus is on the elections now and what will happen on April 8th, the election day, what the outcome of the elections will be. As far as the IDPs are concerned, what I was told when I went there, this was last week, was that the numbers have come down to 70,000 people. This was like over 2 lakhs of people, 200,000 people at the height after the conflict. But the numbers have come down to 70,000, and these people are allowed to come in and out of the camps according to what the Sri Lankan government told us. I think the major focus now will be on reconstruction and restoration of normal living conditions, in restoration of power and electricity, water supply in Kilinochchi and Mullaitivu, which is where most of these IDPs would need to move to because they belong to those 2 towns. So to answer your question, I think on the IDP, the situation seems to have eased to some extent. There are still numbers to be resettled. But I think the major focus now has to be on regeneration of livelihoods in the northern part of the country, the Jaffna Peninsula and the Vanni, Vaunia, Kilinochchi, Mullaitivu. Restoration of livelihoods, businesses, educational institutions need also, faculty to be strengthened, courses to be restored, hospitals, healthcare, railways, roads. This is where the focus needs to be. Then, of course, you have the political aspect of the kind of package that can be offered to address some of the desires and aspirations of the Tamil-speaking minorities of Sri Lanka, and that includes the Muslims also, especially those who live in the eastern province and those who were, in fact, thrown out by the LTTE from the Jaffna Peninsula. They would also have to return and be resettled. Now, what kind of a political settlement would you be able to offer to them? And that is what President Rajapaksa said he intends to focus on after the parliamentary elections are over, and you'll have a kind of a picture of what emerges and what the strength of each party will be at that time. I don't want to go into details of what he proposes to offer. I think that is for him to announce. But India is Sri Lanka's closest neighbor, and obviously we watch the situation there very carefully. And the Sri Lankan government keeps in close contact and communication with us on these issues.
Okay, way too many hands. We'll take 2 more questions. One here. Yes, right. And then your question, that'll be the last one. Okay.
I'm Dr. Sabiha Mansoor, and I'm an educationist from Pakistan. Nice to hear your presentation. I'm not a diplomat and I'm not a politician. So this question is coming straight from a Pakistani citizen who has a lot of hope pinned on Pakistan, India's warm and cordial and friendly relations. I'm talking about a generation of my children who want to get over this period of animosity and tensions and wars between the 2 countries, and who want us to move forward so that we can now focus on development and poverty alleviation. It is disappointing to me that when I read in the newspapers, and even today in your presentation, that India has put this clause and has reiterated that clause, that unless this terror infrastructure is dismantled in Pakistan, it will not go forward. I am from Lahore. There have been 7 deadly attacks in the last 4 or 5 days in Lahore. 50 yards from my home, 50 people were killed twice in the cantonment. So, putting a condition to which Pakistan itself is a victim of terrorism and not just a perpetuator of terrorism, I think this particular point needs to be seen. I know it's a complex thing, and I do understand the apprehensions of both US and India, but Pakistan at the moment is fighting a war against terrorism. Our soldiers, our officers, our civilians are being killed. So I would like you to please comment on the future of Pakistan-India relations. Thank you.
Well, if you were to ask me to give you an ideal picture of what India-Pakistan relations should be, I think we obviously our relations need to be normalized. Our children, your children, my children, our children should live in peace with each other. There's no doubt about that. I think that's a vision all of us thinking Indians, and I hope thinking Pakistanis would also share. And listening to you, I have no reason to disbelieve that. But let me put this in context. Now, when I speak of terrorism directed against India and its people, this is not a recent phenomenon. This is not something that happened in Mumbai, only in Mumbai on 26th November 2008, but it has happened on many, many occasions previously also. And the people of India, and we live in a democracy in India, public opinion matters, what the views held by political parties matter. This is, the consciousness of the Indian people being expressed very, very vividly and very strongly now, that we have just suffered too much from this for too long. And I myself, have grown up listening, I know, to this discourse, this discourse of hostility, conflict. Why should it be there? I ask myself also, why should it be there? Obviously, we need to settle our problems. We need to discuss, to negotiate, to dialogue, to deal with this with maturity and confidence. And that is exactly what Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has always said. The door to dialogue with Pakistan has never been shut. Pakistan is our next door neighbor, is in many senses our closest neighbor. We share so much, in fact, in terms of our history, our common history, our ethnicity, our religious ties, family ties, in fact. And that's what makes conflict and hostility and difference so bitter also, because I think we have been close to each other, connected to each other in so many ways. And when there is betrayal, when there is violence, when there is death and destruction, we feel it even more. And so terrorism, we're seeing it from the Indian point of view. We are two separate countries now. And I know that Pakistan has suffered from terrorist bombings, lives have been lost, and we condemn that. We have never in any way condoned that. Let me put it that way. We condemn it wholeheartedly. But please realize that there are groups in Pakistan that continue to follow an agenda of violence, of hatred. I didn't want to bring up the name of Hafiz Saeed and what the Jamaat-ud-Dawa and others, and the LET. The LET, I think, spells terrorism worldwide today, but certainly it was a group created with a very, very India-oriented agenda. And these activities, in our view, and it's our considered view, and it's not a view based on just emotion or just subjective assessment alone. It's based on objective criteria. We feel that these groups continue to roam, to speak, to be allowed unhindered access to media, to the channels to communicate that agenda, and that affects us, and our people are concerned about it. And our earnest request to Pakistan, and even in my recent talks with my counterpart, Mr. Bashir, was to please pay attention to what we are saying, to please do something about it. The trials of those accused for the Mumbai attacks, we were told last September when we met in New York that it would take 3 to 5 months for this process to be over. But that still continues for whatever reason. I'm not going into that. So our people, the Indian people, see all this, and it's very, very difficult to be convinced in such a situation that we should set aside these concerns and then just move on. And that's why I said composite dialogue. When you talk of resuming composite dialogue, it becomes very, very difficult to do that in the current situation. And we made this earnest effort in good faith when I telephoned my counterpart, my Pakistani counterpart, and invited him to Delhi for talks to make a modest beginning, because we felt that shutting the door on dialogue also was not the way forward. We had to make a small beginning, a very, very small beginning, but it was a beginning. And I know Pakistan came to the talks with a slightly, well, I wouldn't say slightly, different orientation, I'd say. And we've left it at that. We had the opportunity. It was a useful meeting. We listened to what each side had to say. And from the point of view of the Government of India, we have suggested that we continue to keep in touch. And now let's see what the response from Pakistan will be.
Final question here.
Narayan Lakshman of The Hindu. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
Just one question in terms of the context of domestic politics within the U.S. Given that even on some domestic issues like healthcare, that there is a sense of stagnation, just when policies get caught up in the crossfire of partisan politics, do you think that there's any chance, or do you worry that there's any chance of the whole host of initiatives that you've talked about today may become a casualty of that, if not in terms of getting completely knocked off, at least being delayed already, especially, for example, with Civ Nuke, where there have been delays anyway?
No, on Civ Nuke, I don't think there have been delays, and I believe that both sides have engaged in very, very useful discussions, and it's been a problem-solving approach. I mean, in a sense, we see this as a win-win for both sides. And so my own personal experience as far as Civ Nuke is concerned, I think we have every reason to be optimistic about the outcomes that both sides feel should be put in place in terms of, more generation of nuclear energy, U.S. involvement in that. In fact, agreements have already been signed with GE, Hitachi, and Westinghouse earlier this month. So going by that experience, I think there is reason to be hopeful and to be optimistic. And we look forward very much to President Obama's visit to India later this year. That's going to be a major milestone also. Thank you.
Madam Secretary, thank you very much. Let's express our appreciation to the Foreign Secretary. And we stand adjourned. Okay.